It's good to check in and just ask yourself, am I physically hungry? So my general rule is if you're physically hungry, eat. If you're not physically hungry, then ask yourself, what am I hungry for? You might be hungry for just drinking a glass of water. You might be hungry for movement. You might be hungry for connection. You might be hungry for rest. We don't let ourselves just rest once in a while. It's okay to just sit and do absolutely nothing.
Have you ever wondered why some people binge eat? Do you ever indulge in overeating? Do you ever find yourself rushed in eating? I certainly do. Hello boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, this is Nishant and welcome to the Nishant Garg Show. This is a podcast about helping you live a fulfilled life, and my job on the show is to sit with the world-class experts to extract the practices, routines and habits to help you live a fulfilled and abundant life. Today's guest is Lynn Rossy. Lynn is a health psychologist specializing in yoga and mindfulness-based interventions. She developed the Eat for Life class that teaches people to eat mindfully and intuitively, love their bodies, and find deeper meaning in their lives. Her book, The Mindfulness-Based Eating Solution, is based on the concepts in her program. Lynn is a longtime practitioner of mindfulness meditation and Kripalu yoga. She is the president of the Center for Mindful Eating. Without further ado, please enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with Lynn. Lynn, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I'm super thrilled to have this conversation, mindful eating conversation with you. You are a health psychologist and you talk about mindful eating. I would love to ask you, what is your favorite food?
Oh my goodness. What is my favorite food? The one I'm eating in the moment. I like so many different kinds of foods, but I tend to go towards food that's fresh and, less processed. And I don't know, it's hard to answer that question because it's really dependent on the season. It's dependent on the culture that I'm visiting or the place that I am. It's like, what I do when I travel, for instance, is like my favorite thing to do is to go and find the best food I can find. So I just traveled actually to Colorado, and I had this wonderful meal at a vegetarian restaurant on Pearl Street in Boulder. And so that was my last favorite meal, and it was full of, just really wonderful local fresh vegetables.
What was the name of that dish?
It was, the dish? Well, there was many. I had a few different things. One of them was, the beginning dish was a kind of a tartare of mushrooms and tomatoes, which was absolutely delicious. And then I had just another kind of mixed vegetable dish that the way that it was prepared was very simple, but it was so fresh and delightful. And so it's a lot in how it's prepared and whether it's fresh or not, and whether a lot of love has been put into the creation of the dish. And you can tell when love is there and when love isn't.
Love makes the world go round. Well,
yeah.
How did you get into mindful eating?
Well, I was working at the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri, which is where I live. And I was already teaching the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Program for faculty and staff at the university, which you probably know was developed by John Kabat-Zinn. And so I was already immersed in mindfulness-based interventions. And then I was asked by my director to create a mindful eating class. I really had no intention of doing it initially, because I do love to eat. I love to eat. I love good food. I love to savor. I love to have pleasure with food. It's something that I really, really enjoy a lot. And so the idea of teaching a mindful eating class was kind of daunting at first. And so I did a lot of looking around at different programs that were available. There weren't really that many. It was back in 2000 7. And there was only one, and it was more for a clinical population of binge eaters. And I needed something that would reach everybody, so not people who are necessarily, struggling with a clinical eating disorder, but that just struggle with food in general, with knowing what to eat, how to eat, struggling with their bodies, and criticizing their bodies and not treating them well. And that really covers a lot of ground, right? So a lot of people fall into that category. So a more heterogeneous group of people was the people that I was going to serve. So I kind of just came up with a program on my own, using the foundation of the program as mindfulness, because I know that unless you teach somebody mindfulness, they don't really have the skills to be present and to change the behavior from one thing to the other. So with a skill of presence, you can actually notice, am I hungry? Am I not hungry? What am I hungry for? Am I just reaching for food because I'm stressed or bored? So really, I just kind of spent 3 years developing a program based on a few other programs that were out there, and then finally developed what I call Eat for Life, which is the program that I still teach today. And I love teaching it, and I've taught it for many years now, not having ever thought I was going to go into this particular work. But I love it because it's something that we can practice and get so much pleasure from. And it also encompasses the entire health of our body, heart, and mind. So as you dive deeper into mindful eating practices, you really come in touch with your heart, you come in touch with your mind, you come in touch with your body in a very kind and compassionate way, and with the community around you, the community of people that raise food, your farmers, your local farmers, your environment. It just encompasses so many things, and it's so complex that it keeps me interested and curious and present, which is what we're all trying to do, right?
Yeah. I would love to ask you, and if you don't mind speaking about this, did you ever indulge in overeating, or did you have any eating disorder in your life?
Oh, sure. And I'm an open book. Okay, so anybody that knows me knows that I'll speak about anything that happened in my past. I was from the Midwest. I moved to California for 14 years. And the last half of that was in LA. And I developed a drug addiction. And so almost died from that. And on the flip side of that, becoming sober and really finding a spiritual path, I actually developed an eating disorder because I'd quit smoking, I'd quit drinking, I'd quit doing drugs, I'd quit, everything that was bad for me. And it was like almost too much for my system. And particularly at the very end, when I gave up cigarettes as well, that's what really threw me over the edge. And I had such an oral fixation that I really just I felt like I needed to eat all the time. And I was probably a little depressed. I would say I'd throw depression in there on top of that. And I just started eating. And the funny thing was, I was actually selling advertising for a newspaper in Culver City for the restaurant section. So I'd go to all these restaurants and they'd feed me all this food all the time. And so I had lots of opportunity to eat, and I really overdid it. So I kind of developed a binge eating and a little bit of bulimia. And it was about 6 months. And all of a sudden I had kind of an awakening about coming back home to Columbia, Missouri, and going back to school. And there was something about this decision to move and to leave and having a new start that really just turned the whole eating disorder off. And I became focused on something in my life that was really positive, and took the focus off of food and on to something that was really exciting me. And I had gained a lot of weight, so that was still there, and that wasn't going to go away anytime soon. But I didn't, yeah, I mean, that took a number of years. But I didn't engage in the binge eating after that. And I think it was, a series of miracles, really, a series of really, call it divine intervention, call it whatever you want. But I feel like I was being led to the career that I have in mindfulness, in spirituality, and mindful eating, and yoga, and all these things that I now teach, was only because I really had a dark night of the soul.
You mentioned that you were drug addict. You quit smoking. You did quit your drinking. And after that, you had an awakening called not to overindulge in eating. And if I understand correctly, that there is an underlying root cause in every binge eating and eating disorders. What led you to your awakening of not eating too much at that point?
Well, again, I think in my particular case, the binge eating was the result of, I had a really strong addiction to nicotine. I had quit smoking cigarettes actually, but I did so much of that gum, the nicotine gum, that I think I was getting more nicotine than you really are supposed to. I was really overdosing on nicotine. So when I gave all that up, my body, I think, was going through some very interesting chemical changes, and I really was looking to self-soothe through the eating. I loved ice cream. Ice cream seemed to be a really big favorite of mine. And really, I had this kind of magical encounter with my mother, who also had kind of a magical encounter with a voice that said, why don't you ask Lynn to come back home? Because my mom still lives here. And she did. And I said, I knew immediately that I was going to come back home. It was almost just like there was something that spoke to me and just said, you're coming back home. And I became so excited about the opportunity that I was going to have to go back to college and to pursue a career in helping people. Because I'd gotten actually kind of engaged in LA at the time in helping people with HIV/AIDS. And I was very moved by that experience. And so it was about, now thinking about it, I really think it's like when we take the focus off of ourselves and we put it onto helping somebody else and helping others, or take the focus just off your own pathology for a while, that you begin to heal, right? I think that was really part of the healing process, was the ability to take my focus off of myself and onto something outside of myself, something bigger than myself, something that felt connected to a power greater than myself. That's the only way I can really describe it.
And that was going back to the college in your case. Would you say that if something new enters into our life, then we can focus on something else rather than indulging into overeating?
Yeah, I think a lot of overeating comes from it comes from emotions, right? There's a lot of people that say they emotionally eat. So if you're eating because of your emotions, that means that you're not able to somehow be with your emotions in a way that allows you to process them without reaching for something else to fix it, whether that's food or whether that's drugs or whether that's, shopping or whether that's sex or, people reach out for a lot of different things to deal with their emotions, when in fact, when I found mindfulness, that was the tool, right? So if mindfulness is good for anything, as far as I'm concerned, in my own life, it's how to deal with the difficulties in life without needing to reach for anything else. So mindfulness, in my estimation and in my life, and what I've seen in the lives of others, is that this skill of mindfulness, this being present with kindness and compassion and curiosity, helps us to be with emotions without pushing them away, without needing to fix them, without needing them to be different. So for instance, I just had a really difficult week last week. My husband almost died of a heart attack. We were on vacation. He woke me up in the middle of the night, called 911. This is the full catastrophe that John Kabat-Zinn talks about, right? He could have died on the spot. Thankfully, he didn't. But I noticed that we got back home and I got everything put away. And the next day, I just had this wave of sadness that came through my body and came through my heart. And I knew I didn't have to explain it. I knew I didn't have to do anything with it. But I labeled it. I said, there's sadness. Sadness just wants to be here right now. Tears just want to be here right now. And I know through my practice that I can hold it. I can comfort myself. I can let it be there, because when I allow the emotion, then the emotion has a chance to pass through me. And it did, before long, it was over, it was done. And I didn't have to keep fighting with it or trying to deny it or, getting worried about it, but just to feel these emotions, these difficult emotions that come up in our life without needing to reach for something, right? That's part of it. And mindfulness teaches us how to do that. That is like the best benefit for me of a mindfulness practice, is that it teaches us to be with these emotions, these difficult emotions that are going to come up in all of our lives every day. Right? We have difficult emotions every day. So learning how to be with them and just label them and go, oh, well, impatience. Oh, whatever it is, sadness, grief, anger. And the other thing that I think is really useful for people to focus on is, how can I, and this gets to what I was talking about in my own life, how can I build up what I call your emotional bank account? Right? So if you don't build your emotional bank account up with joyful activities, with activities that give you meaning, with, things that really inspire you or give you peace, if you're not doing those things on a regular basis, your emotional bank account is pretty low. And so when something difficult comes along, you're already low. And so the possibility that you're going to go lower is there, right? But if you build in your life with these, it could be simple activities, going out for a walk, looking at the flowers, smelling the flowers, looking at the butterflies that just came in recently, whatever it is that makes you happy and brings you joy, do those things on a regular basis so you have more capacity to be with the difficulty, and you have more resilience that way. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach that I use with people when I'm talking about emotions and how to deal with emotions without necessarily needing to go to food.
What would be the practices to increase our emotional bank account?
I mean, it's going to be different for every person, right? So I always say, anything that brings you joy and inspiration, what is that for you? What kind of hobbies do you like? What kind of do you like to cook? Do you like to garden? Do you like to do yoga? I'm listing the things that I like to do. Do you like to read? Do you like to watch movies? I love documentaries, watching a good documentary. It's just like, I love that. It hooks, it brings me close to other people in the world. So listening to music, people like to knit. I don't know, it could be dancing, boating.
It can be anything.
Kayaking, I don't know, camping. Yeah, it can really be anything. It can be anything. And again, helping each person discover that for themselves. Because when I ask people, what do you do every week just for yourself that brings you joy? And there's a lot of people that aren't very good at that. So I really encourage people to dig a little deep and go, what is it that you could start doing? Because there's a lot of people that really do a lot for other people, and I think particularly women, and, they're caretakers and they take care of other people. And they often are taught, women in particular, are taught to put themselves last. They have their children, they have their husbands, they have their, spouses, their partners or whatever. And, they're trying to usually do, too many jobs at once. And the idea of thinking about themselves, that doesn't come up very often. So it's something that I think could be very useful for people to examine.
When you work with clients and people, what patterns do you observe behind emotional eating, or what are the root causes of that?
It can be a lot of things, right? It can be boredom. A lot of people tell me that they eat when they're bored. And to me, this points to the fact that people don't know how to just be. And that's where your mindfulness practice comes in, right? So if we're not being entertained, or we're not having some dramatic experience, pushing us one way or pulling us another way, and we're just left to our own devices and we're left with ourselves without having anything to do, then we can't just sit and be. We have to go get some food. Think about people at work. So I worked in workplace wellness for a long time, and, people would not get up from their desk to take a break and walk around the block or get a drink of water or lie down on a yoga mat and take a few deep breaths or stretch or any of these other really helpful things that you could do during the day. But they would get up and go to the break room to see what there was to eat. Now, they weren't hungry, but that seemed to be an acceptable reason that they could go take a break, right? So people need to give themselves the permission to take breaks that are really, skillful and healthful, like all the other things that I just mentioned. You can take a break. You can just do nothing. You can sit and stare out the window, and that's okay. But the problem is a lot of people aren't comfortable enough with themselves to do, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's one problem. That's a problem that mindfulness can solve because it teaches you how to sit with yourself. The other reason that people often eat is because they get into this forbidden food cycle, right, of binging and depriving themselves. So because of all the diets that are out there and because of all of the misinformation that we have about food, we know that diets don't work, right? So diet might work in the short term, but then you're going to go off the diet. You're going to start eating like you used to, and you're going to gain the weight back, maybe more. And so mindful eating is about allowing yourself to have whatever it is that you want so that you don't get into this, denial of food and then binging on food. So anytime you forbid something, you're not going to have it for a little while, right? But you're going to rebel. So you're going to rebel against yourself, and then you're going to binge on it, and you're going to say, well, I'm never going to have it again, so I might as well have a lot now.
Very true.
And then, so you overeat it, and then you go back to the depriving of yourself, and it's this cycle, right? And so that happens a lot because of the diet culture that we live in. So that's something that I help people overcome as well. There isn't any forbidden food in my classes. You can have whatever you want, but I ask you to have it mindfully. So when you have anything mindfully, you begin to really discover, is this food I really want? And if it is, eat it and enjoy it. But if it isn't, then, you discover something. I hear over and over again when people begin to really eat mindfully that the things they thought they liked, they don't even like anymore, right? And so and research even shows this, that when people eat mindfully, they begin to prefer healthier choices simply because they taste better. So I don't tell anybody how to eat. I just say pay attention and let your senses guide you, right?
Yeah. So what would be those mindfulness practices you recommend to develop mindful eating habits?
Okay, well, that's a good question. So, yeah, like, how do you do this? Well, so the first thing that I ask people to do is before they eat. So, if you find yourself reaching for food or heading to the refrigerator or the kitchen or the break room or wherever you are, I ask people to tune into the signals in their stomach, right? And so I also ask them to take a few deep breaths. So if you take a few deep breaths, right? Take a few deep breaths with me right now, okay? Yeah. So actually it's called, I call it the basics. So the first one is B, and it stands for breathe and belly check. So you breathe a few deep breaths because when you do that, you calm the body down. Okay. And when you calm the body down, your body is actually prepared to eat. It's called the rest and digest response as opposed to the fight or flight response. And when the parasympathetic nervous system is activated, your stomach is actually prepared to receive food. It's very important, really, because if you eat when you're stressed, that's the worst time to eat because the food isn't really digest as well and you're going to have problems, right? And so we know that people eat when they're stressed. So if you take a few deep breaths and you calm down, you might notice that you weren't really hungry at all, that you were just a little anxious, and now you feel better. But check in with your belly and see, are there signs of hunger? Do I feel a little empty? Is there some growling or gurgling, sensations in your belly?
True.
Right. Do you check if you're physically hungry before you eat?
I would be guilty of speaking about this from last 2 to 3 months. I've been finding myself indulging in food because I'm not bored. I have so much work to do, but I know it's for me. I'm observing that it is just filling in the gaps.
Filling in the gaps.
That's
Yeah.
all for me, and I'm keenly aware. And from last week, I've changed. I'm doing a food journal. Whatever I'm eating, I'm keeping a note of it.
I see. Yes. Well, so it's good to check in and just ask yourself, am I physically hungry? So my general rule is if you're physically hungry, eat. If you're not physically hungry, then ask yourself, what am I hungry for? You might be hungry for, just drinking a glass of water. You might be hungry for movement. You might be hungry for connection. You might be hungry for rest. We don't let ourselves just rest once in a while. It's okay to just sit and do absolutely nothing.
This is so profound. And when you just said hungers, I realized what I'm hungry for.
What are you hungry for?
I would say social connection.
Yes. Yes. I just want to kind of go through those basics again. And the first is to check in with your belly and see if you're hungry. And if you are, then you can go ahead and eat. And then pick what food you want to eat. So this is really important. So if you pick the food that you really want to eat, then you're less likely to overeat it. But if you just pick anything, it's like, oh, well, let me just eat this. Then you might go, well, that really didn't satisfy. I really wanted this. And then so you go eat something else. So decide before you eat, what is it that I'd really like to eat? Is it something crunchy, something salty, something, smooth, something, whatever it is, kind of decide what you would eat that could satisfy you in this moment. And then once you have that food, take a look at it. What does it look like? Assess your food. That's the A of the basics. And notice what the colors are, where it came from, how processed is it. And then begin to eat, and really pay attention. The S of the basics is to slow down, right? We eat too fast. About a fourth of us are slow eaters and the rest of us eat way too fast. That would be me. And slowing down helps us to really enjoy it. As you're eating, continue to investigate your hunger. That's the I of the basics. Investigate your hunger throughout the meal. And about halfway through, if you could stop and go, am I still hungry? Or, is my belly satisfied? And if you have food on your plate, you don't have to finish it, right? That's another reason people overeat is because they're in the clean your plate club. And so, yeah, okay. I got a little laugh
That's
out of
me.
that. Yeah. Well, you don't have to gauge when to stop eating because, there's still food, but really asking your body. So the mindful eating really asks that you start to have this relationship with your body and guide your behavior based on the body signals, not the external signs of, well, is there still food left? Because there's always more food. I mean, we could always eat more food. It's everywhere. It's rampant, all around us. So really start tuning into your body for the signs that it's had enough, and begin to honor those signals by stopping. And you can put the food away for later. You can do many things with that food, but you don't have to eat it if the body's not still hungry. I think chewing thoroughly is a great part of mindful eating, because when we chew our food thoroughly, we're actually getting the nutrient value out of the food, and we're helping ourselves to slow down. And that's a really important part. I mean, I have people just focus on chewing thoroughly, and they notice all kinds of health benefits from that. Like they don't have GERD anymore. They don't have digestion problems anymore, because people tend to gulp their food down without chewing very thoroughly. And then the last part of the basics is to savor. So the S of the basics is to savor your food. I like to say, if you can't savor it, why are you eating it? And that food is there to be enjoyed and to be savored and to be a real, I mean, that is a joyful part of life, right? We have the opportunity, multiple times a day, 2 or 3 or 4, to sit and eat and enjoy and savor the bounties of the world, And I really encourage the people through my class to make eating and cooking and preparing food, which is a really important thing right now, because so many of us are, not able to go out and eat anymore. And what you do get in takeout is not always that good. So people are going into the kitchen more, people are cooking more. And so take this opportunity to really begin to hone your cooking skills a little bit. Try to find things that are easy and simple that you can enjoy, and really take pleasure in the fact that you've cooked it for yourself, and add that special ingredient, which is the love that I talked about earlier.
What are you cooking these days?
Well, I just made a huge batch of pesto. Okay. It's summer. I just came back from a week away from home, and my basil plants out in the back were very full. So I am known for my pesto. So I made this huge batch of pesto that I'm going to use tonight with something.
So
I like vegetables. I like cooking vegetables. I really tend more towards vegetarian, although I'm not a vegetarian. I tend more in that direction. My husband tends to like a little meat once in a while, but I don't cook it at home. I cook all the vegetables. And summer is a great time for that, right? Fruits and vegetables are abundant, and you can't hardly go wrong with the summer vegetables that are available.
Yes. Would you consider any sort of meditation practice for mindful eating or to live a better life? Let's say that.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So I teach meditation in my classes. It is, according to the research that I did on my program when I was working at the university, mindfulness and the skill of mindfulness is the kind of foundational skill that you need to end overeating, to increase body appreciation, to increase the ability to eat when you're physically hungry and not eat when you're not physically hungry. So the way that you learn how to be more mindfulness is through meditation practice. And so I do a simple meditation on the breath to start out, where you just focus on the breath, and then, your mind wanders, of course, and you bring it back. And that bringing yourself back over and over again to the breath helps you begin to establish this ability to be present in your life. And then, of course, it's not just about being present. It's about being present with kindness and compassion and non-judgment. Because if you're just present, that's not enough. You have to bring in these other heart qualities to your practice so that you can soften around what you're going to discover when you start mindfulness practice. So I think all mindfulness new practitioners should realize that when you start a mindfulness practice, it's not going to be pleasant necessarily. I think mindfulness needs a caveat. It's like, you could run up against feelings that you're not used to experiencing, or that you've pushed down and tried to avoid. You're going to come up against thoughts that you haven't really paid that much attention to, because we have all of these automatic thoughts that are going off in our minds all the time. And when we start practicing mindfulness, we become aware that we're all a little crazy, right? I mean, our mind is just really filled with the most negative, critical, judgmental thoughts imaginable that you might not have noticed before. So I always like to tell people about my own experience with that, because when I first started mindfulness practice, I actually thought that I'd had all of these judgmental thoughts all my life and just hadn't noticed, or that a monster had taken over my head, and neither one of those options gave me much peace. So it took me a while to discover that, our minds are just conditioned this way, and that I could make friends with my mind. I could make friends with the emotions. So it's all about making friends with your life, right? In every aspect of your life, every aspect of your being needs to be befriended.
Yes. I read about Choiceless Awareness meditation in one of your blogs. Could you speak to that meditation, please?
Absolutely. And so I teach this later on in the class. I think when people are first starting mindfulness, it's helpful to establish focus and concentration. And so you focus on the breath. And many people who practice mindfulness, focus on the breath. But I think after a while, we need to expand. So I actually move people through the class from the breath to being mindfulness of emotions, to being mindful of emotions, to being mindful of thoughts, to being mindful of sounds, to being mindful of whatever arises. So choiceless awareness means that you don't have any one object that you are focused on, like the breath, but you just sit choicelessly aware of whatever is arising in your experience of being alive. And it's this real open, spacious, wonderful way to meditate. And I think some people actually respond better to the choiceless awareness right off the bat than some other people, right? So you can kind of practice both of them and see which one seems to be resonating with you more. But I think there's a benefit to both, right? One of them helps you to develop concentration. The other one helps you to become more spacious and just more open and more allowing of each sensation that might be present. And they happen so quickly, right? So when you sit and you're choicelessly aware, there's no one place that you can actually place your attention, because sensations are moving at such a quick rate of speed, you can't really hold on to anything, which teaches you something very important. So mindfulness practice teaches us that everything is always changing.
And what time of the day do you meditate?
All day long.
Okay. So
here's the deal. So it's good to have a formal mindfulness practice. That's great. And so I used to, for many years, it was first thing in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, I was on my cushion and I did my half an hour meditation. And I think that's great, but my life has changed and I've become much more organic with my practice. And so some days it'll be later on in the day, some days it'll be yoga because I believe that yoga is just another form of meditation, right? So the way that I practice yoga, I practice it as a meditation. So it's meditation in motion. And so I see that as a viable mindfulness practice as well. And so I do yoga, I do some qigong once in a while, I do sitting meditation, I do walking meditation. And so it's a lot more organic for me these days. I never do anything too late in the day because then I'm just, basically more tired. So generally sometime before 5 o'clock.
In
Except
the evening.
I teach in the evening. So I do teach yoga in the evening. So I guess I do it then too. Because I think when you teach, you also are practicing. But so mindfulness practice is from the minute you wake up in the morning to the minute you go to sleep at night.
Would you say that you have done this work for a long period of time that you can integrate at any point in your everyday life?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Every time that I move into judgment, I wake up. Every time I get lost in thought, I wake up. So all those moments of falling asleep are bells of mindfulness for me. And it's my bell to wake up. When I start getting lost in like social media or shopping online or whatever it is, I can feel the dullness of that, right? When you're not alive, when you're not really present in your life with what's, with what has meaning and purpose, if there's a dullness to that, right? And when you've practiced a lot, you can begin to feel yourself going offline, if you will. Mm-hmm. And that's your bell of mindfulness. Like that wakes me up to, oh, wait a minute. What am I really doing? What am I really feeling? What am I really sensing in this moment right now? So if I keep coming back to this moment over and over again in a formal meditation practice, then I'm able to do that in the rest of my life. And that's where it really matters, right? Because it doesn't matter if I meditate every day. If I can't take it into my everyday life, who cares, right? It's not helping me. So we really want to take it into our everyday life and do those informal mindfulness practices. Everything that you do can be a mindfulness practice. When you get in the shower in the morning, that can be a mindfulness practice. Are you paying attention to the water against your skin and the smell of the soap? And, or are you, arguing this with somebody at work while you're in the shower,
That's true.
Right? You've got a lot of people in the shower. You should kick a few of them out and just be in the shower by yourself. So, all of these times that are like routine activities are times when we tend to lose our mindfulness, right? Because there's not a lot of thought that needs to go into making the bed, for instance, or fixing a cup of tea. But be present for those. Those are the moments of your life, right? Every moment of your life, to the extent possible, is a moment that you can bring love and compassion, attention, and that makes really life turn into your meditation practice.
Then let me ask you this. What do you do when you wake up in the morning? What does your first 60 to 90 minutes look like?
Yeah, well, it depends. So, I get up and I make coffee, usually. Either that or I go and do yoga, right? So if I do a morning practice these days, it's usually going to my meditation room. I'm lucky enough to have a meditation and yoga room that I built 3 years ago off my house. And it's very lovely. And, I really appreciate it. So oftentimes I'll come in here and do a little bit of yoga, or, maybe I'll make coffee first and then take a shower. And then every morning has either yoga in it, meditation in it, and every morning has a spiritual reading. So one of the things that my husband and I do together, which is really lovely, is that before he goes off to work, because he's a primary care physician, and so he goes into work these days, and I stay home and work from home. But we have a couple of different things that we read. So I have a spiritual book group that I have here at my house, and so we're always reading something from that, whatever book we're reading at the time. And then my husband likes what's called the Daily Word, which is from Unity. And so he reads that to me. And so we spend time really grounding ourselves in some kind of spiritual philosophy, some kind of spiritual encouragement, some kind of spiritual connection that connects us both to something greater than ourselves and to each other. So that's really an important part of our morning.
What book, or I should ask you, what spiritual book you are reading these days?
Well, okay, so this is just in the last week or two, my book group is reading a little teeny book called Training in Tenderness by a Tibetan monk, and it's called Buddhist Teachings on Savor, the Radical Openness of Heart that Can Change the World. And I'm loving this because it's talking about tenderness, and it's not a word that people use very often. And I'm finding in my own life that instead of talking about it like, okay, let's be more loving, let's be more kind, the idea of tenderness has really shifted me into softening. And I think one of my biggest learnings that I'm trying to have is around softness and tenderness. And so this little book comes at a really great time because I think right now in our world, there's so much unlike tenderness happening, and I'm really connecting with this quality of heart that feels tender. And so I noticed, it's affected me already. I'll be driving down the road or walking down the street, and I'm judging somebody for, let's say, not wearing a mask or, whatever. And that judgment, again, those things unlike tenderness wake me up to the fact that I'm not connected to my heart, right? And so I'm connecting to my heart through this book, which I think is just always very lovely. And so that's one little, and I'm reading a lot of books on anti-racism, so that's been recent acquisitions in my bookshelf have been books on anti-racism, because I really do think that I'm a white person, I'm a person of privilege, and I've been conditioned. Mindfulness is about seeing our conditioning, and a really deep conditioning that I have had is that of a white person of privilege. And that's deep, it's deep in our culture, it's deep in our conditioning. And so I'm trying to do everything that I can to wake up to that conditioning and to try and figure out what I can do to help end systemic racism and end, white privilege in our country. Mm-hmm. So that's a big area of, literature that I'm reading right now.
So could you name any one book out of your acquisitions?
Well, White Fragility, by Robin DiAngelo, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. Those are the two that I finished White Fragility and then I've read, The New Jim Crow quite a while ago, but those are the ones that are big on my list right now.
Got it.
Yeah.
Lynn, is there any life philosophy that you live your life by, or any favorite quote that comes to your mind?
Well, so when I first got sober back in LA many years ago, the first spiritual teaching that I came upon was something called A Course in Miracles. Okay. And I really dove into that for 10 years, really in depth. And it really became a part of who I am, and I think a part of my understanding of how to be in the world without suffering. And that whole philosophy is about moving from a thought system based on fear to a thought system based on love. And there's many lessons. There's 365 lessons in the course. And one of the ones that's always come up for me time and time and time again says, in my defenselessness, my safety lies. And I think I really tried to live by that as much as possible. So instead of defending ourselves, which, we are so often, we fall into, that defense that we do to try to protect ourselves is only really hurting us. And so when I can become defenseless and I can become open and I can become soft and I can become tender, then my safety lies in that. It doesn't lie in anything else but that.
That is so profound. Well, Lynn, before I ask you my last question for this conversation, I would like to state your favorite motto. If you can breathe, you can do yoga, and yoga should feel delicious.
Yes, true.
And where can our listeners find you online?
Okay, well, I'm pretty easy to find. If you go to www.lynnrossy.com, that's my website, and I'm sure the spelling will be on your website as well.
Yes.
And I have recordings on there that people can use. There's meditation recordings for my book, for my classes. I have video of yoga, that a few of them that people have used that they find very helpful. I love teaching beginners, right? So I love teaching people who don't think they can meditate, who don't think they can do yoga. I love to show them that they can. And nothing brings me more joy than to help somebody discover the joy of yoga that thought they couldn't do it. And I've done that a lot, right? So I do believe that if you breathe, you can do yoga, and that yoga should be delicious, just like the food that you eat.
Wonderful. Well, certainly I learned not to binge eat, and I'm going to apply breathing and checking with my belly before I eat. So Lynn, any closing thought, any recommendation, anything that you would like to say before we end our call?
Well, I just really encourage people to do whatever they can to become more present with themselves with kindness. There's so much, we live in, a world that tells us we're not enough over and over and over again. So it's not, surprising that people, feel so badly about themselves. And so I really encourage people to read, to study, to practice yoga, practice meditation, whatever you can do to open your heart to the beauty of who you are, because who you are is perfect in its imperfectness. And that's all we need to do, is to be human and to embrace our humanness and our imperfect perfection.
Thank you so much, Lynn. It was wonderful chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really glad we had this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this podcast episode today. If you did enjoy this, please subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcast, or you can visit https://nishantgarg.me, NISHANTGARG.me. You can also share this episode with your loved ones to help them live a fulfilled life. You are not alone in this journey. We all struggle in life. There is no shame in talking about it. I go through my highs and lows. I get depressed, and these practices help me in living a resilient life. You can also do this. You got this. Don't judge yourself. You are doing the best you can. And thank you so much again.